This very brief message is all the overloaded internet will allow me during these very strange times. So, happy birthday, William Wordsworth. Cheers. In making this tribute, and in wanting to pay my respects to Wordsworth today, the word milestone kept coming into my head. I was no doubt thinking of the measured, paced-out progression of his poems, and of his poems as outings and excursions, not least the prelude, that epic journey of life with milestones and marker posts, both real and metaphorical, along the way. Which in turn led me to the word landmark, and the idea of Wordsworth as a permanent feature in the literary landscape. Whatever happens to us as a culture, a civilization, and even a species, it's impossible to imagine a view of poetry that doesn't include William Wordsworth, imposing and undeniable, no matter how distant. Staying with that territory, few authors have inserted themselves into their surroundings the way that Wordsworth did, even to the point where the poet and his output have overwritten the map itself, making Wordsworth country part of our national geography. And of course, those topographical sensibilities and preoccupations were never just sentimental. Wordsworth understood the vital association between human existence and the wider natural world, and the absolute importance of honouring, exploring, recording and recreating those connections. His concerns for the local, the domestic and the rural made him unfashionable during urban and metropolitan periods of poetic thinking. They now define him as one of the poetic godfathers of literary environmentalism. On this anniversary, I'd also like to mention the excellent work of the Wordsworth Trust and everything they do to curate, celebrate and share Wordsworth's achievements. Every year for the past 2 decades, and possibly longer, the Trust has invited me to give a reading in Grasmere, sometimes taking place just a stone's throw from Dove Cottage, and occasionally in St Oswald's Church, within earshot of Wordsworth's grave. If the reading is a pleasure and a privilege on my part, it's also something of a pilgrimage. Each year I scramble up to Easdale Tarn, then further up to Codale if my knees allow it, then sit at the water's edge and read one of the books of the prelude until the rain arrives and another paperback edition dissolves in my hand. I'm waiting for the Ordnance Survey to publish a laminated edition. Or sometimes, taking the track towards Greenhead Gill, to what I take to be the struggling heap of unhewn stones, I sit and read Michael and dissolve myself. Why that poem still causes me to cry some 40 years after first reading it at school, I can't really explain, but I think it's something to do with those clear currents of language within the language that Wordsworth seemed capable of channeling when he was at his best. That poem, and many others like it, are works that have prompted me to say how Wordsworth pressed the reset button on poetry at a crucial moment in its evolution. With Coleridge, through the Lyrical Ballads project and the inception of Romanticism, or dictating with Dorothy at his side, or during the privacy of his own composition, Wordsworth was part of a literary rescue mission that stopped poetry becoming an entirely elitist and aloof activity. Reaffirming the poetic virtues of narrative, metaphor, description, rhyme and monologue, Wordsworth reminded us that without losing any of its philosophical gravitas or intellectual curiosity, poetry could still be a relevant and relatable art form, speaking to a wide readership and occasionally moving people to tears. There's barely a line or verse in the whole of Wordsworth's considerable output that can't be read as a metaphor for his entire poetic creed. On this occasion, I can't resist seeing a manifesto-style declaration in the passage sometimes referred to as "There was a boy," a piece of writing so Wordsworthian that Coleridge said he would have recognised it even if he'd been running wild in the deserts of Arabia. In the poem, Wordsworth describes how mimic hootings to the silent owls can be made with fingers interwoven, both hands pressed closely palm to palm. The passage is compelling and instructive because through an apparently simple and even childlike process, using something near at hand and handmade, a call or song is conjured that transcends human language. Yet it's one that still functions as communication or speech, because in reply the owls would shout across the watery vale and shout again, responsive to his call. The silence that follows, as Wordsworth describes it, is one of the most profound in all poetry. Wordsworth was a reluctant but entirely deserving poet laureate. A latter-day postholder could be forgiven for feeling somewhat over-eager and largely inadequate by comparison. But if I'm allowed a moment of boldness on his 250th birthday, and by the way, happy birthday, William, then from one laureate to another, this brief message is my own attempted call in reply, across 250 years, ever grateful for his example, still responsive to his call.